about to listen to a marvelous story, which was the American Revolution.
But what was the American Revolution?
The American Revolution was a political revolution that happened because the 13 colonies were under total control of the British monarchy. The citizens of these colonies got bitterly angry and exasperated of the British rule for many unfair causes. But the principal reason was the taxes that were imposed by the British government.
The American Revolution was important because it was a fight against an undemocratic and unfair regime for democracy, freedom, political and personal rights of each individual, citizen, and colony. Thanks to the sensational victory of the colonists, they were able to gain their desired freedom, the rights they deserved, and it was possible for them to establish their own democratic country called the United States of America. It all starts with the first stage, normality.
When King George III ascended to the throne of England in 1760. In 1763, the Seven Years' War, which was a conflict between the British and the French over the territory in North America, came to an end with the British victory and the expulsion of the French in North America. To make it official, France and England weirdly signed the Treaty of Paris. Then it came to the second stage, criticism of the existing regime. The 7 Years' War left the British with an economic crisis and a lot of debts, so they cheerfully taxed American colonists in order to them to recover the money they had lost.
The taxes that existed were the Sugar Act. The Sugar Act was a group of taxes imposed in April 5, 1764. The taxes were imported wine, imported iron, foreign refined sugar, molasses, and coffee. Stamp Act. 1 year later, in 1765, the Stamp Act was imposed. It was a tax to all kinds of information and documents. Quartering Act. In the same year, the Quartering Act was imposed. This act obligated the assemblies of the colonies to pay for supplies for the British Army which were used at war. Townshend Revenue Act. In 1767, the British imposed new taxes on glass, paper, tea, paint, and other goods shipped to the colonies from Great Britain. These taxes were called the Townshend duties. Colonies rapidly started to criticize the British government. However, they couldn't do anything because they didn't have representation in the British Parliament.
No taxation without representation
Became the colonists' distinguished motto.
The next stage of the revolution was the third stage, widespread dissatisfaction. Colonists had enough. British have gone too far, so they start to boycott British products. On October 1768, British soldiers had to board into Boston to prevent an uprising, and therefore the taxes that the British government have recently imposed. The colonists didn't like the presence of the British troops. That's why in 1770 the Boston Massacre occurred, and it caused the death of 5 male civilians and injured 6 others. For all these situations, Britain was unwillingly forced to remove taxes, all except for tax on tea.
Then, 3 years later, in 1773, 3 British ships delivering tea from the East India Tea were ambushed by furious Bostonians known as the Sons of Liberty, disguised as Indians. They boldly dumped all the tea into the Boston harbor in protest of the tea tax. This act is known as the Boston Tea Party. As a result of the Boston Tea Party, in 1774, the British government imposed 5 new laws designed to deeply punish the colonists. Colonists called these laws as intolerable acts, but Great Britain called them coercive acts.
Then came the fourth stage, transfer of power. September 5th, 1774 occurs America's first Continental Congress. It consisted on 55 delegates
created using Powtoon.
Georgia. The Congress was a governing body, by which American colonial governments generally discussed their different options concerning British offenses.
The British government was beginning to lose a lot of power and respect from the colonists. After all these events, it happened even a major event, which marked the beginning of the fights for independence. Paul Revere, a silversmith from Boston, received classified information that said that a British army was planning to attack the city of Concord and Lexington in the coming days. Therefore, on the night of April 18th, Paul makes his remarkable and dauntless midnight ride to Lexington and Concord to warn colonists of the British army attack.
The British are coming! The British are coming!
Shouted Paul Revere at the top of his lungs as he rode through town.
Consequently, the Fifth Stage Civil War began. Paul Revere's ride preceded the Battle of Lexington. The Battle of Lexington and Concord were the first battles of all the Revolutionary War that happened in places such as Lexington, Concord, Lincoln, and Cambridge. All these places were near to Boston. The fight held in Lexington was a victory for the red-coated army, name that the colonists gave the British Army. But the second battle in Concord was a victory for the colonies. Since 1768, the Great Britain's army had invaded Boston and other colonies near it. That is why this first and one of the most important battles happened. This battle happened in 1775.
Battle of Long Island.
This battle was the most important and major one in the whole war. The victory was for the British, and they eagerly took possession of the most strategic city in the United States, New York. The Americans lost this battle because they saw themselves surrounded by British in all places, so they escaped from Long Island, and the British army took possession of Upper Manhattan and then the rest of New York. The war was held in 1776.
In the same year, July 4th, 1776, America earnestly declared its independence. The main purpose of America's Declaration of Independence was to explain that they no longer regarded themselves as part of Great Britain, but as a new nation called the United States of America. The American colonies had already established their own Congress, currency, army, and post office.
Battle of Yorktown. This was the last battle of the Revolutionary War, which was held in 1781 in Virginia. In this battle, the British army was allied with the Roman Empire and the Americans with France. At the end of the battle, the British surrendered to the French and the Americans. They won because their strategy war was better, and they worked as real allies. Also, the British situation was bad because half of this army was unfortunately infected with malaria, an epidemic mortal disease.
After 2 years, on September 3rd, 1783, the Treaty of Paris was signed, officially ending the Revolutionary War. The Treaty of Paris gave the 13 colonies officially their independence and freedom from Great Britain in order for them to become the United States of America. From that day on, they had the freedom to make their own laws. They were free to trade with whomever they chose and were no longer subject to higher taxes. Just exactly what the 13 colonies desired.
Sixth stage, Reign of Terror. There were no really signs of terror after the American Revolution. However, colonists did attack loyalists to keep control under their authority.
Seventh stage, Thermidorian reaction. After all the chaos, George Washington, the leader of the Continental Army in the American Revolution, became the first president of the United States on February 4, 1789. He brought democracy and peace to the United States of America, and therefore he finally created a fair and peaceful country.
And that, my friends, was the awesome story of the American Revolution.
Created using TOWNSHEND.